Harper watched her younger brother, Leo, from the doorway of their small, cramped apartment. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into space. The left side of his face a swollen purple testament to the visit he'd had an hour ago. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the suffocating weight of desperation. At 19, Leo was supposed to be full of life, not fear. "They came again," she stated, her voice quiet, tired. Leo flinched, his gaze finally meeting hers. The bravado he usually wore like armor was gone, leaving only the terrified boy underneath. "Harper, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The debt, it doubled, some kind of penalty. They gave me 24 hours. 24 hours. The words hung in the air, a death sentence. They didn't have $20, let alone the thousands he owed to the kind of men who used their fists to negotiate payment plans. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in Harper's chest. She worked double shifts at the diner until her feet bled, and it was never enough. They were drowning. Then, she remembered, a crumpled napkin tucked away in her wallet. A few weeks ago, a quiet, intense man had left it on his table with his tip. He had seen her arguing with her manager over a docked paycheck. He hadn't said a word, but he'd left the napkin. On it was a phone number and a short cryptic phrase. "For problems the police can't solve." At the time, she'd thought he was a private investigator, maybe a retired cop who did freelance work. A vigilante. It was a crazy long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling as she typed in the number from the napkin. She took a deep, shaky breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She composed the message, her thumb hovering over the send button. It was a desperate prayer sent out into the digital void. "If you really help people who need it, please, save my brother before it's too late." She hit send. For an hour, nothing happened. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by Leo's quiet, ragged breathing. Harper began to feel foolish, her last sliver of hope dwindling. It was a stupid idea, a fantasy. Then, a low rumble started outside, a sound that grew steadily louder, vibrating through the floorboards. It was the sound of powerful engines, too many of them. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds. Her breath caught in her throat. Her entire humble residential street was blocked. 7 identical gleaming black sedans were parked bumper to bumper, their tinted windows like the eyes of predatory insects. The streetlights glinted off their polished hoods, creating an intimidating, surreal spectacle. Men in sharp, dark suits emerged from the cars, moving with a silent, coordinated purpose that screamed danger. They fanned out, securing the street as if they were a presidential motorcade. Then, 2 of them walked directly to her front door. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small apartment. Harper stood frozen, her mind unable to process what was happening. This wasn't a discreet ex-cop. This was something else entirely. The man at the front, older, with a face like carved granite, spoke through the door, his voice calm, clear, and utterly terrifying. "Ms. Harper, Mr. Moretti received your message. He would like to discuss the terms of your request." The walk from her apartment door to the lead car was the longest 10 yards of Harper's life. Flanked by 2 silent, imposing men, she felt the curious and fearful eyes of her neighbors peering from behind their curtains. The world she knew, a world of cracked pavement and noisy neighbors, was colliding with a universe of silent, menacing power. One of the men opened the rear door of the center sedan. The interior was a cavern of soft leather and polished wood, smelling faintly of cologne and money. And in the dim light, she saw him. Luca Moretti. He wasn't what she expected. He wasn't an old, paunchy man in a tracksuit. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and severe classical beauty. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but it was his stillness that was most intimidating. He sat perfectly composed, exuding an aura of absolute control. In his hand, he held his phone, her desperate message glowing on the screen. She slid into the seat opposite him, the door closing with a soft, heavy thud that sealed her inside. "Do you have any idea who you sent this to?" he asked. His voice was calm, devoid of any discernible emotion, as cold and smooth as river stones. Harper's throat was dry. She could only shake her head. "You were looking for a retired cop named Costello," Luca stated, not as a question. "He used to leave that napkin for people. He passed away 6 months ago. I acquired his assets." He let the implication of the word assets hang in the air. "Including his phone." Trembling, her voice barely a whisper, Harper explained everything. She told him about Leo, the gambling, the loan sharks, the beating, the 24-hour deadline. She laid bare the pathetic, desperate details of their lives. Luca listened without expression, his dark eyes never leaving her face, his gaze so intense it felt like he was peeling back the layers of her soul. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the car. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then back at her. He made a decision. He pressed a single button on his phone. It rang once before it was answered. "It's me," Luca said into the phone, his voice dropping into that same flat, lethal tone. He listened for a moment. "The kid's debt. It's mine now." He paused, letting his words sink in on the other end of the line. "Leave him alone. Permanently." He ended the call without waiting for a reply and tossed the phone onto the seat beside him. He turned his full, unnerving attention back to Harper. "The loan shark who is threatening your brother works for one of my subsidiary organizations," he explained, the words delivered with a chilling nonchalance. "You just asked the wolf to scare away his own dogs." A wave of relief so profound it almost made her dizzy washed over Harper. Leo was safe. It was over. But then Luca's expression hardened. The brief, almost imperceptible flicker of something other than ice in his eyes vanishing completely. "Your brother is safe," he said. "But now his debt is no longer with a street-level thug." He leaned forward slightly, the space between them shrinking, his presence filling the car. "It's with me, and I always collect what I am owed." "I don't have any money," Harper said, the words rushing out in a panicked whisper. The relief she had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a new, more sophisticated kind of terror. She had traded a predictable street thug for this cold, unreadable man whose power had just blocked out her entire street. A dangerous ghost of a smile touched Luca Moretti's lips. "I don't want your money." The convoy of black cars moved as one, gliding silently through the city streets. They didn't take her home. They took her to a sleek modern skyscraper of black glass that pierced the clouds. They rode a private elevator in silence, ascending to a penthouse that was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. The view was breathtaking. The entire city spread out below them like a carpet of glittering jewels, but Harper felt like she was at the top of the world's most beautiful prison. Luca walked to a floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her. "One of my shipping containers was sabotaged last week," he said, his voice calm, conversational, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had yelled. "A multi-million-dollar loss. It was an inside job. Someone in my organization, someone I trust, is feeding information to a rival." He turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. "I don't need your money, Harper. I have more than I could ever spend. I need something far more valuable. I need eyes and ears where no one would ever think to look." He laid out his proposal, his terms for her brother's debt. "You will work for me," he stated, "but not here. You'll be the new waitress at Vesuvio." Harper knew the name. It was an exclusive, old-world Italian restaurant, famous for its food and infamous for its clientele. It was a place where the city's most powerful men made deals in quiet, velvet booths. "Vesuvio is my informal office," Luca explained. My lieutenants, my capos, they all meet there. They feel safe, they talk, and they won't notice a new waitress just trying to do her job. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. Your task is simple. You listen. You watch. You tell me who is betraying me. It was an insane, impossible demand. He was asking her to be a spy in a den of wolves. And for your own safety, he added, as if it were an afterthought. You will be with me, at all times. You will live in a secure apartment I provide. I will take you to and from your job. You will be by my side. Always. The rule was absolute, a cage disguised as protection. She would be trading her freedom for her brother's life, stepping out of her small, simple world and into his, a world of violence, paranoia, and secrets. He saw the terror in her eyes, the frantic conflict warring within her. Refuse, he said, his voice a blade of ice. And your brother's debt goes back to the streets. With interest, I'll wash my hands of it. He let that sink in, then offered the alternative. Accept, and you enter a world you may never be able to leave. He stood before her, a devil offering a terrible, beautiful bargain. The choice, he said, his expression unreadable, is yours. Harper's first day at Vesuvio felt like walking onto a stage in the middle of a play she hadn't rehearsed. The restaurant was a world of dark wood, red velvet, and hushed, important conversations. The air was thick with the scent of garlic, wine, and danger. The other staff moved with a practiced, almost fearful efficiency, and the patrons, all men in expensive suits with hard eyes, watched her every move. She was the new face, the unknown variable, and they assessed her with a mixture of casual interest and deep-seated suspicion. Before her shift, Luca had given her a crash course in his world. He sat with her in a private booth, a stack of photographs on the table between them, pointing out the key players in his deadly game. Marco, he said, tapping a photo of a handsome, smiling man. My right hand. Loyal since we were kids. But he's ambitious. He thinks he's smarter than he is. He slid to the next photo, a man with cold, reptilian eyes and a severe haircut. Nico, my accountant. He sees everything in numbers. No emotion, no loyalty. Just profit and loss. A man like that can always be bought. The final photo was of a stunning woman with fiery red hair and a sharp, intelligent gaze. Sophia, Luca said, his voice holding a different, more complicated tone. She manages this place. She knows where all the bodies are buried because she helped me bury some of them. He paused. We used to be involved. It ended. She says it was amicable. I'm not so sure. Now, standing in the middle of the bustling restaurant, a tray of drinks in her trembling hands, the faces from the photographs were real. She could feel their eyes on her as she served their tables, her smile a fragile, plastered-on mask. She tried to be invisible, to fade into the background, but she felt like she was under a spotlight. During a lull in the service, as she was restocking glasses in the narrow corridor leading to the kitchen, a large figure blocked her path. It was Marco, Luca's right hand. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're the new girl, he said, his voice a low, friendly purr that didn't feel friendly at all. He leaned against the wall, trapping her. A word of advice. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Stay away from him. From Luca. He's not what you think. He destroys everything he touches. I've seen it happen before. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And it was delivered with a sincerity that chilled her to the bone. Later that evening, as the restaurant was beginning to empty, Luca summoned her to his regular booth in the back. He was staring into a glass of amber liquid, swirling it slowly. He didn't look at her as she approached. His gaze was fixed across the room, where Marco was laughing with a group of his men. He was the first one to warn you about me, wasn't he? Luca asked, his voice quiet, contemplative. Harper froze, her heart skipping a beat. How could he possibly know? He's protective, Luca continued, still not looking at her, his voice a low murmur. Always has been. He took a slow sip of his drink. The question is he trying to protect you from me, or is he afraid of what you might find out? He finally turned his eyes to her, and they were dark with a paranoia that was now a shared, tangible thing between them. The game had just become terrifyingly real. Tonight, you're not a waitress. Luca's words, delivered with his usual calm authority, hung in the air of the secure apartment. He held out a garment bag. You're my date. Harper unzipped the bag to find a dress that was more beautiful than anything she had ever touched. It was a simple, elegant sheath of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the light. It was understated, powerful, and impossibly expensive. He was taking her to a shareholders' dinner for one of his legitimate front companies, a high-end real estate development firm. It was a different world from the smoky backrooms of Vesuvio. This was a world of corporate sharks in bespoke suits, a place where the battles were fought with stock options and hostile takeovers instead of guns. Walking into the grand hotel ballroom on his arm, Harper saw a side of Luca she hadn't known existed. He wasn't the feared Mafia boss here. He was Mr. Moretti, the brilliant, respected, and slightly intimidating CEO. He moved through the room with an easy confidence, discussing market trends and zoning laws with an expertise that was dazzling. He was charming, intelligent, and utterly in command. The illusion was shattered by a man named Peterson, a rival developer with a smug face and a reputation for dirty tactics. Peterson, clearly having had too much champagne, approached their table, his eyes raking over Harper with a dismissive sneer. "Well, well, Moretti," Peterson said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I didn't realize your company's assets were so decorative." He looked directly at Harper. "Tell me, dear, what exactly is your position in the company?" The insult was a public slap, designed to humiliate Luca by belittling the woman on his arm. The air grew thick with a sudden, tense silence. Harper felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. Luca didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand up. He simply turned his cool, unreadable gaze on Peterson. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that held no warmth. He leaned forward and whispered something in Peterson's ear, a single, quiet sentence that no one else could hear. The effect was immediate. The color drained from Peterson's face. He began to tremble, his eyes wide with a sudden, stark terror. He stammered a frantic, incoherent apology before turning and practically fleeing from the ballroom. Luca turned back to Harper as if nothing had happened, taking a calm sip of his wine. Now, where were we? On the ride back to the apartment, the silence in the car was heavy. "What did you say to him?" Harper finally asked, her voice a whisper. Luca turned to look at her, the city lights flashing across his face. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "I just reminded him," he said, his voice a low murmur, "that some debts aren't financial." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. The touch was warm, protective. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice softening. "You're stronger than you think." The unexpected praise, the simple, genuine compliment from this complex, dangerous man, left her utterly breathless. The apartment Luca had provided was a fortress, secure, luxurious, and completely impersonal. But tonight, its silence felt different. Harper was jolted from a restless sleep by a sound from the living room. A sharp, violent crash, like glass shattering against a wall. Her heart leaped into her throat. An intruder? She crept out of her bedroom, her body tense with fear. The living room was dark, save for the cold, blue glow of the city lights filtering through the panoramic windows. And in the middle of the room, she saw him, Luca. He stood with his back to her, a dark silhouette against the glittering skyline. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the bar, and the sharp, acrid smell of it filled the air. On the floor near the window lay the shattered remains of a glass. He was drunk, and for the first time since she had met him, He seemed utterly, completely unguarded. She was about to retreat back to her room when he moved, picking something up from the mantelpiece. It was a small, silver-framed photograph. He stared at it, his shoulders, usually so straight and commanding, slumped with a grief so profound it was a physical presence in the room. "Luca?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He startled, spinning around. In the dim light, she saw his face. The cold, controlled mask was gone. His eyes were raw with a pain so deep it stole her breath. He looked lost. "You shouldn't be up," he said, his voice a rough, hoarse rasp. "I heard a noise," she replied, taking a hesitant step into the room. "Is everything okay?" He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "No, nothing is okay." He looked down at the photograph in his hand. "Today's the anniversary." He didn't need to explain. She knew. "My father," he said, the words thick with whiskey and a grief that was still fresh after all these years. "He was killed, right in this room." He gestured vaguely at the spot where he stood. "By a man he trusted like a brother, a traitor in his own family." The confession hung in the air, a shocking, intimate revelation. This was the source of his paranoia, the ghost that haunted him. His obsession with finding the traitor in his own organization wasn't just about business or power. It was about a wound that had never healed. "I trusted the wrong person once," Luca said, his voice breaking, the sound a shocking crack in his armor of indifference. "It cost my father his life. I won't let it happen again." He finally looked up at her, his eyes shining with an unshed, desperate emotion. He saw not a waitress, not a spy, not a pawn in his game. He saw the one person who stood outside the poisoned circle of his world. "That's why I need you, Harper," he whispered, the admission a raw, painful surrender. "Because you're not one of them. You're the only one I can trust." The inversion of their roles was staggering. The most powerful, feared man in the city, the man who held her life and her brother's in the palm of his hand, was admitting that he was utterly, completely dependent on her. And in his moment of weakness, she felt a surge of something she had never expected: power. His confession, raw and vulnerable in the dead of night, changed everything. The dynamic between them shifted. He had entrusted her with his deepest wound, and in doing so, had given her a piece of himself. Harper was no longer just a reluctant spy paying a debt. She was a partner in his quest, the sole guardian of his trust. Emboldened by this new, fragile intimacy, she became more daring in her role at Vesuvio. She was no longer just a passive observer. She started to listen more actively, to pay attention to the subtle shifts in tone, the guarded conversations, the names that were whispered when Luca wasn't around. Her focus narrowed in on Nico, the cold, calculating accountant. He was always on his phone, his conversations clipped and coded. He never socialized, never showed loyalty to anyone but the bottom line. He was, in Harper's mind, the perfect traitor. One evening, she hit what she thought was the jackpot. She was in the service corridor when she overheard Nico in a nearby alcove, his voice a low, urgent whisper on his phone. "The delivery is set for tomorrow night," Nico said. "Pier 4, 10 o'clock. Make sure the package is secure. No mistakes this time." Pier 4. It was a known territory of Luca's biggest rival. A delivery. It had to be it. The betrayal. Her heart hammered with a mixture of fear and triumph. She had him. She relayed the information to Luca that night, her voice breathless with the certainty of her discovery. "It's Nico," she said. "I heard him myself. He's meeting them tomorrow night at Pier 4. Luca's face hardened. He listened to every detail, his expression becoming a mask of cold, lethal resolve. He trusted her. Completely. "Good work, Harper," he said, his voice a low growl. "We'll be waiting for him." The next night was a storm of silent, controlled action. Luca and a team of his most trusted men, including a reluctant Marco, set up a perimeter around the dark, desolate Pier 4. They hid in the shadows, armed and ready, waiting to catch the traitor in the act. Harper watched from a secure car a block away, her stomach in knots, a live feed from Luca's comms unit buzzing in her ear. At precisely 10 o'clock, a car pulled up to the pier. Nico got out. He looked around nervously, then opened his trunk. He pulled out a large, square box. "Move in," Luca commanded into his comms. His men swarmed the pier, surrounding a shocked and terrified Nico in seconds. Luca strode forward, his face a mask of thunderous fury. "Open the box, Nico," Luca ordered. With trembling hands, Nico opened the box. Luca stared down into it, but there were no drugs, no weapons, no stacks of cash. Inside the box was a large, elaborately decorated birthday cake in the shape of a pink castle. From the shadows of the pier, a woman and a little girl of about 6 years old ran out, shouting, "Surprise!" It was Nico's ex-wife and his daughter. The delivery wasn't a deal with a rival. It was a surprise birthday party for his little girl. The realization hit Luca like a physical blow. It was a setup, a test. Someone had deliberately planted a false trail, knowing he had an informant, knowing he would act on the information. Someone knew about Harper. He turned and looked back in the direction of her car, his expression grim. The danger had just doubled. She was no longer an invisible spy. She was a known target. The fallout from the Pier 4 fiasco was immediate and chilling. The atmosphere in Luca's world, already thick with paranoia, became suffocating. The traitor was no longer a ghost. They were a puppeteer, and they had just proven they could pull Luca's strings using Harper as their instrument. Her role as a spy was over. She was now a liability, a marked woman. The fear, which had subsided into a manageable hum, returned with a vengeance. She felt 1,000 eyes on her at Vesuvio, imagining every whisper was about her, every cold stare a threat. Luca's response was swift and absolute. He became her shadow. The pretense of their arrangement was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate need to keep her safe. He never let her out of his sight. He drove her to and from the restaurant himself, his hand often resting on her knee, as if to reassure himself she was still there. He would sit in his booth at Vesuvio, his gaze constantly tracking her movements, a silent, lethal guardian watching over his most precious asset. The forced, constant proximity was an exquisite torture. The air between them crackled with an unspoken, unbearable tension. It was a volatile cocktail of his fear for her safety and their burgeoning, undeniable desire for each other. They were trapped together in a cage of their own making, and the space was getting smaller every day. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. A violent thunderstorm rolled over the city, the sky splitting open with a deafening crack of thunder. The lights in Vesuvio flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the entire restaurant into absolute, disorienting darkness. There were a few screams, a chorus of confused shouts. Harper, who had been clearing a table, froze in place, her heart leaping into her throat. In the pitch black, she was blind, vulnerable. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm. She let out a small, terrified gasp, her body tensing, ready to fight. "It's me," a low voice whispered directly in her ear, the warmth of his breath a shocking, intimate caress against her skin. "I'm here." It was Luca. He had crossed the entire restaurant in the dark with unerring accuracy, his only goal to find her. He pulled her back against his chest, his body a solid, warm shield around her. She could feel the frantic, powerful beat of his heart against her back. "Are you okay?" he murmured, his lips brushing against her hair. "Yes," she breathed, turning in his arms to face him. They stood there in the absolute darkness, hidden from the prying eyes of his men, his enemies, the entire world. It was the first time they had been truly alone since this had all begun. The fear, the danger, the lies, It all melted away, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection. He groaned, a low, desperate sound from the depths of his soul, the sound of a man who had been denying himself for too long. His hands came up to frame her face, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, possessive, all-consuming claiming. It was a kiss born of terror and longing, a raw expression of his fear of losing her and his overwhelming need to have her. It was a confession made in the dark, a truth that could only be spoken when no one was watching. Just as the kiss deepened, the emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a stark, ghostly glow. They sprang apart as if electrocuted, both of them breathless, their faces flushed. They stood inches from each other, the evidence of their transgression hanging in the air between them, and across the room, illuminated by the emergency lights, Harper saw her. Sophia, the restaurant manager, Luca's former lover. She was staring at them, her beautiful face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. And in her eyes, Harper saw not just the jealousy of a spurned woman, but the cold, calculating hatred of an enemy. Sophia's mask of fury was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cool, professional composure that was somehow even more unnerving. In the chaotic aftermath of the power outage, she was a pillar of calm, directing staff and reassuring patrons. But Harper couldn't forget the look she had seen, the flash of raw, venomous hatred in her eyes. 2 days later, Sophia approached Harper as she was setting up for the evening service. Her smile was warm, her tone conspiratorial. "We need to talk," Sophia said, guiding Harper to her small private office. "About Luca, and about the traitor." Harper's guard went up immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophia laughed, a low, knowing sound. "Oh, please. I saw the way he looked at you in the dark. I'm not blind. And I'm not your enemy, Harper. I've known Luca my whole life. I know he's in danger. And I think I know who's behind it." She leaned forward, her expression a mask of sincere concern. "It's Marco," she whispered. "He's always been jealous of Luca's position. He thinks he should be the one in charge. He sees Luca's feelings for you as a weakness, a chance to make his move." It made a twisted kind of sense. Marco had been the first to warn her away from Luca. Was it a genuine warning or an attempt to isolate his boss? "I don't have any proof," Harper said, her voice cautious. "But I do," Sophia replied, a triumphant glint in her eye. She turned to her computer and pulled up a series of emails. They appeared to be from a dummy account, sent to one of Luca's rivals. They were filled with coded language, but they detailed shipping routes, meeting times, and security vulnerabilities. Information only someone in the inner circle, someone like Marco, could possibly know. "I found these on a flash drive Marco left behind by mistake," Sophia explained. "He's getting sloppy. You have to show these to Luca. He'll listen to you. You're the only one he trusts right now." Harper was torn. Her gut screamed that something was wrong, but the evidence seemed irrefutable. And the thought of finally ending this, of exposing the traitor and freeing them both from this nightmare, was too tempting to ignore. Desperate to protect Luca, she made a fatal mistake. She believed her. That night, she presented the proof to Luca. She watched as he read the emails, his face growing darker with every word. He was silent for a long time, the conflict warring in his eyes. It was his oldest friend, his brother in all but blood, against the woman he was falling in love with. His trust in her won out. The confrontation was a disaster. Luca didn't accuse Marco publicly. He met him in the deserted restaurant after it had closed. But the moment Luca laid the printed emails on the table, Marco exploded. "You believe this?" he roared, his face a mask of wounded betrayal. "You believe this garbage over me? After all these years?" "The evidence is here, Marco," Luca said, his voice cold, trying to control the situation. "Evidence?" Marco laughed, a bitter, broken sound. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his own gun, slamming it onto the table between them. It wasn't a threat. It was a symbol of his broken loyalty. After everything we've been through, you believe a handful of papers and a pretty face over me? He stared at Luca, his eyes shining with the pain of a man whose entire life of loyalty had just been invalidated. She's poison, Luca, and you let her infect us. Before Luca could respond, Marco turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving his gun on the table, a final, damning testament to the trust that had just been shattered. The foundation of Luca's organization, his oldest friendship, had just crumbled, and it was all because of her. The confrontation with Marco left a deep, festering wound in the heart of Luca's organization. The trust between them, forged over a lifetime, was broken. Marco didn't leave. He simply existed, a ghost of his former self, his interactions with Luca clipped, formal, and cold. The loyalty of Luca's men, once absolute, was now divided. Some sided with Marco, whispering that the boss had gone soft, blinded by a girl. Others remained loyal to Luca, but watched Harper with a new, colder suspicion. Luca, surrounded by the wreckage of his inner circle, retreated into himself. The warmth and vulnerability he had shown Harper vanished, replaced by a familiar, chilling distance. He looked at her, and he no longer saw a partner. He saw the source of the poison, the catalyst for the chaos that was tearing his family apart. "You brought a war into my house, Harper," he said to her one night, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You wanted to help, but all you did was break the only thing I had left that was whole." He didn't send her away completely, but he might as well have. He moved her out of his penthouse and back into the secure apartment, effectively ending their physical and emotional proximity. He posted guards outside her door, but they were no longer there to protect her from the outside world. They were there to keep her in, to isolate her from his. The partnership was over. She was once again a prisoner, but this time, her cage was made of his distrust and her own devastating guilt. Alone in the silent apartment, with nothing but time and regret, Harper replayed the events in her mind, over and over. Sophia's perfectly timed discovery, the flawless, convenient evidence, and then a small, insignificant detail from the night of the blackout surfaced in her memory. When the lights had gone out, the entire restaurant had been plunged into chaos. Patrons had screamed, staff had panicked, but Sophia had been calm. Too calm. She hadn't seemed surprised at all. In fact, she had been the first to produce a flashlight, the first to begin directing people. It wasn't the reaction of someone caught off guard. It was the reaction of someone who had been expecting it. The thought was a spark in the darkness of her despair. She caused the blackout. It wasn't a storm. It was a deliberate act to create chaos, to push Luca and her together in the dark, to witness their kiss and set her own vengeful plan in motion. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The emails were fake. The betrayal wasn't Marco's. It was Sophia's. Fueled by a desperate, furious need for the truth, Harper knew she couldn't stay locked away. She had to get back to Vesuvio. She used the one tool she had left, the sympathy of a young guard who still saw her as a victim, not a traitor. She feigned illness, a desperate need for a specific medicine from a 24-hour pharmacy. The guard, breaking protocol, agreed to escort her, but instead of going to the pharmacy, she directed him to the alley behind Vesuvio. Before he could react, she slipped out of the car and disappeared through the restaurant's service entrance. She went straight to Sophia's office. It was late. The restaurant long closed. The office was locked, but Harper, remembering a spare key hidden above the doorframe for emergencies, managed to get in. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she trusted her gut. She found it in a locked desk drawer, which she pried open with a letter opener. Tucked away at the back was a second phone, a burner phone. She turned it on. The screen lit up with a string of text messages exchanged with a single, unknown number. They were coded, but the meaning was clear. They spoke of sabotaged shipments, of false trails, of a plan to dismantle the Moretti family from the inside. The final message, sent just an hour ago, made her blood run cold. He's broken. Marco is out. The girl is isolated. He's alone. It's time to make the final move. Sophia was the traitor. Harper's heart hammered with a vindicated, terrified triumph. She had the proof. She had to get to Luca. She turned to leave, her hand on the doorknob. The door opened from the outside. Sophia stood there, her face a mask of cold, calm fury. And in her hand, she held a small silver handgun, fitted with a silencer. "You never should have sent that message," Sophia said, her voice as cold and quiet as the silencer on her gun. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. The friendly, concerned ally was gone, replaced by the predator that had been hiding underneath all along. Harper backed away, holding up the burner phone like a shield. "Luca will know," she said, her voice trembling. "He'll know you did this." Sophia laughed, a low, contemptuous sound. "By the time he finds your body, he'll be convinced Marco finally snapped and came back to clean up loose ends. It's the perfect ending to the story I wrote." She confessed everything, her words dripping with the venom of a woman scorned. She spoke of her years of loyalty, of being Luca's partner in all but name, only to be cast aside for a little waitress. She had felt discarded, her power and position threatened. So she had made a deal with his rival, planning to help him destroy Luca and take her own place at the head of a new family. "He went soft," Sophia sneered, raising the gun, her aim steady. "Love made him weak, and now it's going to get you killed." While all this was happening, Leo was pacing his small room, his mind a whirlwind of worry. Harper had called him earlier, her voice strained and strange, telling him she was fine, but that he shouldn't try to contact her for a while. The lie was thin, and Leo, who knew his sister better than anyone, felt a deep, gnawing unease. He knew she was in trouble, the same trouble he had dragged her into. The guilt was a physical weight. He couldn't stand it. He had to see for himself that she was okay. He went to the secure apartment building, but the guards, under strict orders, refused him entry. Panicked, he went to the one other place he knew to associate with her new life, Vesuvio. He saw the guard's car parked in the alley, the driver's door ajar. The guard clearly not at his post. Fear, sharp and acidic, flooded him. He slipped into the restaurant through the same service entrance Harper had used. He heard voices coming from the manager's office. He crept closer, his heart pounding. He heard Sophia's confession, her threat. He heard the terror in his sister's silence. He didn't think. He just acted. Just as Sophia's finger tightened on the trigger, Leo burst through the door. "Harper, get down!" he screamed. He threw himself in front of his sister, a human shield, in the exact same instant that Sophia fired. The sound of the silenced shot was a dull, ugly thump. It was followed by the heavier, sickening sound of Leo's body hitting the floor. Harper screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. She dropped to her knees beside her brother, a dark, crimson stain already spreading across his chest. His eyes were wide with shock and pain, his hand reaching for hers. The office door crashed open again. Alerted by the commotion and the sound of the scream over the open comms line from the guard outside, Luca and his men stormed in. The scene that greeted them was one of straight from a nightmare. Sophia, standing with a smoking gun in her hand, her face a mask of shocked fury. And Harper, on the floor, cradling the bleeding, broken body of her brother, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes looking up at Luca with a devastation so complete it shattered what was left of his heart. In that moment, seeing the innocent boy he had sworn to protect dying on the floor, a casualty of his world, a rage unlike anything he had ever known consumed Luca Moretti. The cold, controlled leader vanished, and a pure, murderous fury took his place. The world narrowed to a single point of red-hot fury for Luca. He didn't see the office, his men, or even Harper. He saw only two things: the spreading crimson stain on the floor and the woman holding the gun. Before Sophia could even think to raise the weapon again, 2 of Luca's men were on her, disarming her and slamming her against the wall with brutal efficiency. But Luca waved them off. He walked slowly toward her, his movements calm, deliberate, and utterly terrifying. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, charged with the promise of imminent lethal violence. He stopped directly in front of her. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, and in his dead black eyes, Sophia saw her own death reflected. He reached out, his hand closing around her throat. "No, Luca." Harper's voice, a choked, desperate scream from the floor, cut through his murderous haze. Don't become the monster she wants you to be." Her words, even in her agony, were a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink. He looked from Sophia's terrified face to Harper, who was desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood from her brother's chest. He saw the innocent life bleeding out on the floor, a direct consequence of his world, his choices, his failure to protect them. He saw the reflection of his own father, dying because of a betrayal, and he saw Harper, begging him not to let the cycle of violence consume him too. With a guttural roar of pure, frustrated anguish, he released Sophia's throat. He took a step back, his chest heaving. He had made a choice. He turned to his men, his voice a low, iron command. "Take her. The police will get an anonymous tip. They'll find her in a locked car with the gun, the burner phone, and a full confession I'll have my lawyers draft. She'll spend the rest of her life in a cage. It's better than she deserves." He had chosen justice, not vengeance. For Harper, he rushed to her side, dropping to his knees on the floor beside her. He ripped off his own expensive suit jacket, balling it up and pressing it hard against Leo's wound, his hands instantly slick with blood. "He's going to live," Luca swore, his voice raw, breaking with a desperate, fierce conviction. He looked directly into Harper's tear-filled eyes, making a silent, blood-soaked oath. "I promise you, Harper, he is going to live." The words were not a comfort. They were a vow. The man who had failed to save his own father, who had failed to protect her, would not fail again. The life of the boy bleeding out under his hands was now the only debt that mattered. And he would move heaven and earth to pay it. The hospital was a sterile, white purgatory. Leo had been rushed into emergency surgery, but the news was grim. The bullet had torn through his lung and nicked a major artery. He was losing too much blood. The on-call surgeon, a competent but overwhelmed man, was blunt. "His chances are not good," the doctor told them in the harsh, fluorescent light of the waiting room. "The damage is extensive. He needs a specialist, a cardiothoracic trauma surgeon. The best one in the country is Dr. Alistair Finch, but he's in Chicago for a conference. There's no time." Harper crumpled into a chair, a sob of pure, hopeless despair tearing from her throat. It was over. Her brother was going to die, and it was all her fault. Luca stood motionless, his face a mask of stone. He listened to the doctor's words, then turned without a word and walked to a secluded corner of the waiting room. He pulled out his phone. He made 3 calls. The first was to the head of the FAA in the Midwest. It was a short, brutal conversation involving a debt of honor, a grounded flight, and the threat of a scandal that would ruin the man's career. The second call was to the dean of Northwestern University's medical school. Luca reminded him of a very generous, very anonymous donation that had built a new research wing, and he made it clear that the hospital's continued funding depended on what happened in the next 10 minutes. The third call was to Dr. Alistair Finch himself. The world-renowned surgeon was, as predicted, at a gala dinner in Chicago. Luca was polite, but his voice held the cold, unbreakable weight of command. "Doctor?" Luca said. "Your evening is over. There is a private jet waiting for you at a nearby airfield. You will be on it in 30 minutes. You have a patient in my city. You will save his life. This is not a request." For the next 2 hours, Luca Moretti bent the world to his will. He didn't just use his money, he used his power, his influence, The complex web of debts and fears he had cultivated over a decade. He threatened, he bribed, he coerced. He moved the heavens and the earth with a ruthless, singular focus. Less than 3 hours after the doctor had given them the grim prognosis, a private jet screamed onto the tarmac of a local airport. An escorted motorcade, ignoring every traffic law, delivered Dr. Finch to the hospital doors. The world's foremost trauma surgeon, still in his tuxedo from the gala, was scrubbed in and entering the operating room before the local staff even knew what was happening. Luca's redemption was not in an apology. It was in this. It was in using the full, terrifying force of his dark world not to destroy, but to save. He was proving his promise to Harper not with words, but with an impossible, breathtaking display of action. He found her still huddled in the waiting room, a fragile, broken thing. He sat down beside her, the long, agonizing wait for news stretching before them. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Why would you do all this?" He looked at her, his dark eyes full of a truth he could no longer hide. "Because I made you a promise," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "And because his life is worth more than any empire." The surgery lasted for 6 agonizing hours. Harper and Luca sat in the sterile silence of the private waiting room he had secured, a chasm of unspoken emotions between them. Finally, at dawn, a tired but triumphant Dr. Finch appeared. "He's a fighter," the surgeon said, pulling off his surgical cap. "The next 24 hours are critical, but the surgery was a success. He's going to make it." The relief was so sudden, so absolute, that Harper's legs gave out. Luca was there in an instant, catching her, his arms a strong, steady presence around her. She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time, she didn't cry from fear or despair, but from a profound, overwhelming gratitude. He held her, just held her, until the trembling subsided. Later, as the sun rose over the city, they stood by the window of Leo's private recovery room, watching his chest rise and fall in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The crisis was over. The future, once again, was an unknown country. Luca turned to her, his face etched with a deep, weary sadness. "I told you my world was poison, Harper," he said softly. "I brought this into your life, into his." He looked at his sleeping brother. "You and Leo deserve better. You deserve a life of peace, away from all of this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. "This contains everything you need," he explained, his voice devoid of all its usual command, filled only with a heartbreaking sincerity. "New identities for you and your brother, passports, access to an account with enough money to last a lifetime. You can go anywhere, be anyone, start over, somewhere safe, somewhere I can't hurt you again." He was offering her an escape, a clean break. It was the ultimate act of love, the ultimate sacrifice. He was willing to tear his own heart out to ensure her safety. "I love you enough to let you go," he whispered, the words a raw, painful confession. Harper listened, her gaze never leaving his face. She saw the pain it cost him to say those words, the genuine, selfless love behind the offer, and in that moment, she knew, with absolute certainty, what she had to do. "You're wrong," she said, her voice quiet, but strong. She took the envelope from his hand, but didn't open it. "Your world isn't the poison. The way you lived in it was. But last night, you used your power to heal, not to hurt. You can be the cure, Luca, not the disease." She stepped closer, placing the envelope on a nearby table. She reached up and cupped his face, her touch gentle. "I don't want a safe life without you," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "I want a dangerous, complicated, beautiful life with you." She rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss that was not born of desperation or fear, but of a clear, conscious, and irrevocable choice. When she pulled back, she looked him straight in the eye. But we do it my way now, she said, a small determined smile on her lips. As partners. 1 year later, the grand opening of the Leo's Second Chance Foundation was in full swing. The center, a state-of-the-art facility in Harper's old neighborhood, was a beacon of hope, offering job training, counseling, and educational scholarships to at-risk youth. It was managed by Harper, whose sharp intelligence and deep well of empathy made her a brilliant and beloved director. The foundation's sole anonymous benefactor was, of course, Luca Moretti. Leo, now fully recovered and walking with a new, hard-won confidence, was the foundation's first success story. He was enrolled in university, studying business, his tuition fully funded. He worked part-time at the center, a living testament to its mission. Vesuvio had changed too. Under Harper's influence, it now hosted a discreet but effective apprenticeship program, giving troubled young men and women a chance to learn a trade in its kitchens, far from the dangers of the street. Harper and Luca were married. Their wedding had been a small, private affair, but their partnership was a quiet, powerful force that was slowly reshaping the city. He was still a man of the shadows, a king in his own world, but she had become his conscience, his compass. She had not pulled him into the light, but had instead shown him how to use his power to protect it. That evening, they stood on the terrace of the penthouse, the same spot where he had once explained the cold logic of his world to her. The city glittered below them, no longer a kingdom to be conquered, but a community to be nurtured. Luca came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his hand on her stomach, where their child, a new legacy, was growing. "Happy?" he whispered, his voice a low, warm rumble against her ear. She leaned back against his chest, a contented smile on her face. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. She turned in his arms to face him, her love for him a steady, brilliant light in her eyes. The journey had been terrifying, the cost immense. But the wrong message, sent in a moment of pure desperation, had not led her into danger. It had led her home,